Lansing School District, key stakeholders, parents, students, staff. My name is Kyron Harvell. I'm director of the STAR grant. STAR stands for School Transformation Accelerates Results. We're very fortunate this afternoon to have STAR interventionist Amber Foster. She's going to present on the topic, why is my child so angry? So again, thank you guys very much for being here. If you have any questions, feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A box, and they will be answered upon conclusion of Ms. Foster's presentation. Ms. Foster, I will turn it over to you. And again, thank you guys for joining our Parent University session.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Kyron, for the introduction. As he said, my name is Amber. I am a STAR intervention specialist with the Lansing School District. Today, I will be presenting on why is my child so angry? And I'm actually very excited to talk about this topic as it's a lot in my background, and I've worked a lot with emotional regulation with kids and specifically how they control their anger. So we will get started. Now, traditionally, we would have a icebreaker in group settings and different things like that, but in the era of Zoom, I thought it would be fun to have a little bit of an introduction and lighten the mood a little bit. So here are some funny notes to start out with that kids have expressed their anger to others. The one on the left says, "I won't love you if you make me clean my room." And then we have in the middle, "I'm angry at you and I'm not talking to you today and tomorrow." And then the last one, which is my personal favorite because it sounds like a conversation between a teen and a parent, is, "Yes, are you mad? Of course not, why? I don't know, the yes sounded angry." All right, so we are gonna start with the definition of anger, as this is the main emotion that we're gonna be talking about today and focusing on. So the written definition is a strong feeling of displeasure, annoyance, or hostility, and usually of antagonism, so a dislike or bitterness. The key thing to remember about the definition is that there's several verbiage in it. So we have displeasure, annoyance, and hostility, which means that there's a number of different levels that anger can be exhibited by. So in the future coming up, we'll talk about the different levels and specifically what that looks like and what that means. Okay, so a little bit more about anger. I'm sure you guys have heard of the iceberg theory before, but it says that what we see isn't always the big picture, that there's a lot underneath of this water that we're not seeing, whereas the part of the iceberg we are seeing is much smaller than what we would expect. In terms of anger, there's been research that shows that there are 6 basic emotions that everyone will or has experienced in their lifetime. Anger is one of them. So that means that all these different emotions that can be shown over here, like rejection, attack, frustration, all can be expressed through anger. So somebody may really be showing that they're angry, but have a combination or a number of emotions that are also subsided underneath the expression of anger. And for those of you who are curious, the other 5 emotions that people will always have or in sometime in their lifetime is disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise. So now that we know anger and what it kind of looks like in the background of it, we can relate this to the ABC model. And I personally am a big fan of the ABC model. It can relate to a number of different things, not just understanding why a kid is angry, but also any emotion any person is having. So to get into that, the ABC model, the A to begin with is antecedent or action. I specifically use action for my younger participants because this is a little bit easier of a word for them. However, with adults and teenagers, it's more than appropriate to say antecedent and have them learn that verbiage. So an antecedent is an event or something to cause the anger. Essentially, what happened? What is the trigger? The B stands for behavior. What did the child do or how did they respond to the antecedent? This is the most obvious part of the ABC model. This is the part that we can observe. And then the last part, C, is for consequence. And the consequence is what resulted after the behavior. So what happened after the emotion, after the actual behavior was exhibited by your child? In this case, after they were angry and they expressed their emotion, what was the consequence? Now, for today's purposes, you could break down every single part of this model and have a long session about each one. However, because we're focusing on why children are getting angry, we are going to be focusing on the antecedent. This is going to be the big picture idea. So going a little bit out of order, B is for behavior. We're going to focus on this. This is observable and can be described. So to give you an example, if a child is pouting and stomping their feet, you would say, I can see you are stomping your feet and your face is frowned. It's observable and you can describe it. You as parents and caregivers and guardians know your child is best. So it's going to be really important for you to understand what body signs are happening with your child. Specifically, are they saying anything, or how do you know they're angry? And the biggest way is body language. Let's be honest, we all know that we've seen the crossed arms and the slanted eyebrows, the frowns going on, and other things such as clenched fists when they're older kids, the tension of the body. This is all signs of being angry or aggressive. And like I said, it's going to be really important for you to start recognizing the body signs of your child in order for them to help identify their own body signs. So if you can verbally see what's happening, if you can physically see what's happening to them, you need to start talking to them and say, I can see this, I can see your mouth is clenched, I can see that your fists are balled up. So they can start to recognize that as well. It's a key step in understanding emotions. And as we described, so here's some lovely little examples. You can see the crossed arms or the pouty lips. A lot of them have the eyebrows. Again, different body signs showing that they are upset or showing some kind of form of anger. So the most important part of the ABC model is antecedent. What event or action happened before the behavior? So before we see the stomping, before we see those body signs and that acting out, what happened? It could be immediately, it could have happened 5 minutes before, it could have happened 10 minutes, or we don't even know, it could have even happened earlier in that day. So it's really, really important to start observing when this behavior is happening and what happened beforehand. So the main thing that I'm going to stress today in this presentation is knowing and understanding what triggers your child's behavior is going to be the most helpful tool in addressing that behavior. And the next slide, we're going to get into specifically 4 categories that behavior can be broken down into and how that can be described as what's causing the behavior. So continuing with our antecedent, if you break it down, there are 4 functions of behavior that any behavior can be categorized into, and that is sensory, escape, attention, and tangible. Easy ways to remember this are seat or eats. Everyone has a seat, everyone eats. I personally use seat, but whatever it is that is easiest for you to learn and remember this, that these 4 things will always be some kind of way to categorize the behavior you're seeing. And if you can figure out which one it is, you'll be able to address that anger. So the first function of behavior, and the first part of seats, is sensory. So why does a sensory behavior happen? So anytime that a child is stimulated, it stimulates the pleasure zones in their brain. Essentially, it feels good. So when does this happen? Sensory can be any time. The most common occurrences, however, are when it's anxious or excited. And examples of this behavior or sensory behavior would be a child putting non-edible items in their mouth. Usually that's like younger kids. However, other kids, that sensory feels good to them. So chewing gum can maybe help them stay focused. Other things are like hair twirling or tapping fingers. And even you can see as I'm presenting, a comfort for me is moving my hands and fidgeting. So I know that my function of behavior, me fidgeting, is me presenting right now. It's a sensory thing. It makes me feel better. The next of the C category is to escape. Escape means that a child is trying to remove an undesired situation or be away from a certain person or activity. When does this happen? When a child is usually understimulated, so something is too easy, they're bored, or it's just undesirable. They don't want to be around it or do that particular thing. The opposite spectrum is overstimulating. If something's too hard or it's frightening to them, they're going to avoid that situation. Examples of this behavior would show throwing food. This means often, and I've experienced this as a parent, is if a child is throwing a food, often you want to take that food away. Well, that's them avoiding trying to eat the food, and now they were successful in doing so. So that's one example. Leaving an area, which would be most common, where kids just get up and leave the situation where they don't want to be around, whether you're asking them to do homework or there's an argument or something that ensues and they head off and they slam the door into their room, they're avoiding a situation. Not staying seated, again, that kind of delays what they're having to do. They're focusing on something else. Whining or complaining about homework is another good example. So even though it doesn't seem like maybe they're avoiding or escaping the situation, they're delaying or prolonging have to do it. So that would be considered still an escape behavior. Attention relates to a reaction or socialization from others. And this can be positive or negative. It's just saying that a child is acting a certain way to get attention. When does this happen? When there's a socialization or a desired interaction between somebody that they're wanting. And they could be also feeling ignored. So this is another reason when this would happen. Example behaviors, screaming or yelling. Obviously, if somebody yells, kind of the gut instinct is to go and either look at them or react, see what's going on. So again, that is attention seeking. Acting out, so throwing a tantrum, all kinds of maybe doing the opposite of what you asked or doing the wrong thing, even though they may know what the right thing is. That's, again, attention seeking. Picking on others. I'm sure siblings can relate to this and families who have multiple children in the home. If you want attention from somebody, what do? You can go poke them until you get that response or that attention. Exaggerations. This refers to maybe a kid telling a story and the story didn't necessarily have as much of an impact as they did exaggerating it. So by them exaggerating it, they might get a more attention seeking and responsive, like, oh, wow, that really happened. Again, just to get that attention seeking. So exaggerations are a behavior that fall under the attention category. The last one, which is similar, is helplessness. So not being able to do something. You might see a kid say, oh, I can't do this. I need help. I need help. And then again, that's a behavior seeking attention from an individual. All right, tangible. So seeking an object or something. This means to obtain access to a preferred item or activity. And why do they do this? For enjoyment and fun. If you get something you want, obviously it's stimulating, it's pleasure, it's fun. When does this happen? When a child wants a specific activity or item is wanted or desired. They might see it and that might trigger that. They might be already in a rough time and then they might want something that makes them feel better. Behaviors that are usually exhibited when the behavior is the function is tangible is begging, crying, or tantrums to use technology. Often you'll see a big response to that. Pushing to get a toy from another. So if a child pushes another child and gets that toy, that's them wanting the object. So it is considered a tangible function of behavior. Demanding to have a specific snack or food. So if they're wanting some kind of food or water or juice, or teens with their hot Cheetos and Takis at one point. If they're demanding that, that's something that's tangible. The function of the behavior is them wanting something. So now that we covered the seat or the functions of behavior, there's some additional considerations that you should always take into thinking about when you're addressing behavior or trying to figure out why a child is so angry. And the first thing is patterns. So once you're looking at what the antecedent is, look if there's any patterns. Is this happening at the same time of day? Is this happening over the same activity? Is this happening when someone is always around, the same person, or only for one person? A bunch of different things to look at, but look for patterns in what is specifically happening over and over and over, reoccurring. That'll tell you a lot if there's certain stimulus that are making your child more angry than necessary. The other thing to consider is age. Obviously, younger kids are going to have a bunch of different stimulus compared to older kids. So that means that their emotions and their anger are going to be, one, expressed differently. So their behavior is going to look different. And two, a lot of times the antecedent or function of behavior may be different as well. The third thing to take into consideration is mental health and trauma. Children who've experienced mental health and trauma are going to react differently to different triggers. A lot of that is because their ability to communicate and because of the fact that their brain has different patterns. So when they're in a trauma response, a lot of times the brain cannot communicate to itself, which then in turn, you're going to have a different reaction, different behaviors, and potentially different antecedents than you normally would. The final thing I wanted to mention, because it is relevant, is looking at COVID-19 and how a spike in mental health has been seen amongst a lot of our children due to the fact of lack of socialization. So right now, there is a lot of things happening in families or in children where their antecedents are revolving more around wanting socialization, but also increasing mental health. So we're going to see a spike in different cases of anger, and probably a lot more anger than what we normally would. But again, I want to highlight patterns. Always look for patterns. This is going to be the best key and solution to helping regulate your child's anger. To look more into mental health, I wanted to show kind of a graph so everyone could understand kind of what it looks like to have normal anger and maybe versus a child or a person that is having maybe mental health issues or needs a little bit more research on what's going on. So this graph right here shows intensity on the left. So how angry are you? How extreme is the behavior that's happening? And frequency. How often is it happening? So this specifically shows that graph is that smaller levels of anger, which we talked about earlier, smaller or less severe levels of anger, like annoyed or upset, are going to happen more frequently, but are less intense than those that are rage or furious or losing control. So this says, again, extreme anger should happen very rarely, but is more intense, versus annoyed, which happens pretty regularly, let's be honest. Even as adults, we get annoyed quite regularly, and it's more frequent to happen. In comparison, if we have a child who maybe has more going on and maybe needs additional support or mental health issues or trauma potentially, we're going to find that the frequency of out of control outburst, rage, anger, aggression, things like that are going to be happening more often versus just getting annoyed or upset. That annoyed or upset trigger might actually turn into a rage versus a child who would normally experience being just getting annoyed. So something again to consider and remember when you are looking for the antecedents and observing behavior of your child when they're angry. All right, so now that we have made it through all of the functions of behavior and really focused on the antecedent of why, I'm going to give a couple scenarios of going through specifically looking at each function of behavior and try and come up with an example of what this would look like. So in this example, we're going to be talking about a yelling teenager. The first function of behavior that we learned was sensory. So sensory may cause the teen to just enjoy being loud. This would then be the function of behavior of sensory. A teen just likes to be loud or heard, and they're overly excited. The next one, which we talked about, was escape. So if a teenager was to yelling in response to escape, what would be the example? A teen may not want to complete their homework or be around a specific person or avoiding going someplace. Attention. The teenager may be wanting to be heard or acknowledged by someone to get a response or reaction. So that would again be the function of behavior if a teen was yelling and it was attention seeking. The last one, which was a tangible, the teen may be seeking to obtain more time on technology, access to friends, going somewhere. So this kind of puts it in perspective. It gives you an example of what the behavior was. In this case, a teenager was yelling, and what the function of behavior would look like. So if the behavior was more not wanting to do homework, we could put it into categorization. We would know that escape was the function of that behavior. And that allows us then to address that behavior and be able to help emotional regulation and resolving the anger that the child is having. The second scenario that I wanted to go over was about Antonio. So Antonio is in school taking a math test. Suddenly the teacher says, "I am going to leave the room for a few minutes. You're on your honor not to cheat." Kind of sounds like a setup. After the teacher is gone, Ed, Antonio's friend, whispers to him, "Let me see your answers, Antonio." Antonio hands Ed his paper as the teacher walks in. So to start this, we're going to look for the behavior, the antecedent, and then what we think is the function of behavior for this scenario, going off the information we have. And again, I know it goes A, B, C, but the easiest to start with is always the behavior because it's observable and it's the most predominant thing you can observe. So behavior for this situation would be handing the test to his friend Ed, essentially cheating. That is the observable behavior that we could witness and describe. The antecedent, Ed asked Antonio to view his test. So we know that he was asked to show the test by a peer. Since we know this now, we can start thinking about the function of behavior. And remember, that's our C: sensory, escape, attention, and tangible. Of these, we can likely guess that it's social. So Antonio is wanting to gain peer attention or approval from Ed in this case. The last scenario that I have for you guys is after breakfast, Mary is asked to go and brush her teeth. She begins to stomp her feet and repeatedly shout she wants some juice. So this one's a little bit more tricky because there's a lot going on. But the first thing is, again, we're going to focus what was the behavior that we saw. We can say that we visibly saw her stomping and shouting, and this kind of gives you an idea, but it's a distraction or a delay. Antecedent. She was asked to complete an undesired task, so brushing her teeth. Mary was asked to go brush her teeth. So now that we know she was asked to do something that she doesn't want, thinking about the function of behavior, we can say that Mary is trying to escape or avoid brushing her teeth. Now, moving forward, now that we have the idea of how we can break things down, we see the behavior and identify the antecedent, we can think about in the future emotional regulation. So I could do a whole nother presentation basically on coping skills and how to help kids regulate their emotions. But for this purpose, the biggest thing that you can do, and like I said, highlighted earlier in the presentation, is knowing antecedents. In the last example, if we know Mary doesn't like to brush her teeth, we can start preparing her, having conversations about what she can do instead, or providing incentives and consequences that are positive or negative based on that behavior. If you're able to prepare Mary to brush her teeth, you're going to have a lot less of an anger response if you continue to coach and work through that situation. And again, that helps you too, because you can mentally prepare yourself as a parent or guardian or caretaker that you understand the child is going to have a potential anger response when being asked to do that task. The other thing that we talked about was body signs. So again, recognizing how your child is reacting, that behavior. What do you see physically happening to your child? Because no matter what, different emotions automatically cause our body to react, whether we know it or not. But the thing is, we have to start to recognize that. And as an outside person, to help your child understand that their body has these body signs, it can help identify what emotions they're having. So if you see a child starting to ball their fist or stomp or get tense, you need to talk about those body signs and help them recognize that this is a potential way for them to understand that their anger could be elevating to a level that's not necessary. The third thing, which I am a strong believer in, is coping skills. So no matter what, we're always going to have these scenarios where kids, well, and anybody in general, are going to have triggers of anger. So learning how to bring that level of anger down in any situation is important. There's a number of different things you can do, whether or not that's breathing exercises in that very moment. If you have some time, you can remove the child from the stimulus and have coloring, playing a game, yoga, a number of different things. But just to remove from that initial distraction or that initial trigger so we don't have a more extreme response. Once the child's removed from that and able to calm down and regulated, then we can start having that conversation and move to that C, consequence part of that ABC model. And the most important thing about a consequence is being able to reflect. So a child needs to be able to talk about what had happened and how things can maybe go differently. So that includes talking about the antecedent. What happened to make them angry? What they did, what was their behavior? What was their response to that antecedent? And then additionally, their body signs, what they did to calm down, and what they can do differently next time. However, as mentioned before, it needs to be done after they're elevated or before they're elevated. So that way it's a continuous conversation and open engagement to prepare or reflect. And that is all I have for you guys. If Kyron does want to give out the slides, I made sure to put the links in here, which are great resources to go to and some videos to watch. Is there any questions?
Thank you very much, Ms. Foster, for that phenomenal presentation. At this time, we do not see any questions. However, this video will be placed on the Office of School Culture website. You can go to www.lansingschools.net, click on Parents, and click the link that says Parent University. This will also be transferred to a YouTube document for future viewing. Again, Ms. Foster, thank you very much for this presentation. Thank you very much to all key stakeholders for joining us for this session of Parent University. Everyone have a great weekend. Be safe and be healthy. Thank you.